Welcome to the Awaken on Purpose podcast, where each week you'll receive insight, inspiration, and advice for living your purpose and making an impact as a conscious leader. You'll also hear inspirational stories of other conscious leaders who are living and leading from a place of mission, vision, and purpose. Get ready to be enlightened, empowered, and transformed with me, your host, Jennifer Spore. It is my absolute joy to welcome as a guest to the show today, MaryBeth Hyland. She is the founder and chief visionary of Spark Vision. She knows that extraordinary success is rooted in the vision, values, and culture crafted by purpose-driven leaders and their teams. With over a decade of experience built on knowledge from a BA in social work and MS in nonprofit management, she's known for her ability to guide individuals and teams to know, own, and live their values. She does that with the understanding that we all have a deep desire to know and return to our most authentic selves at work, home, and within. Welcome, MaryBeth. I'm super excited.
I'm so excited. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yes, it's my absolute pleasure. I'm really just stoked to have this conversation. So let's dive right in. We would love to hear more about what inspired you to actually get into the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because there's a lot of stories that I could tell, and there's a lot of reasons why you ultimately get to where you are. But there was one almost like a rising up moment that made me realize I had to go out and create my own business and start to help more people in the way that I get to do this amazing work today, and helping people to articulate their values and then learn how to live in alignment with them. And it was this, it's almost like, those experiences where you're out of body and you can watch yourself. So while I'm telling the story, I'm going to be watching myself from the past, because it was like that. It was such a big thing. So before I started my business, I was working for a global nonprofit, and I was responsible for a young professionals program. And every year we put on a conference, and the final year that I was there were, maybe 400 people that attended. And every year I gave the closing remarks to the conference, and I tell a story, and it would be usually something that had to do with how I was engaged in the community. And over the years that I was there, I was a after school teacher, and then became a big sister and big brothers, big sisters. And then my little sister became our foster daughter. And so people loved hearing these stories because it was a journey, and they were on the journey with me when I would share them. And the last year of the conference, I had this extreme experience where I knew it was time for me to go. I knew it was time for me to figure out what the next thing was going to be. And it also happened to be that my father had died. And it was a moment where I was like, you know what? I'm not going to give the same remarks that I give every year at the end of this conference. I felt this incredible charge inside of me to speak my truth in a way that I had never done before. And so on stage in front of 400 or so folks, I came out of the closet from the sense of being a child of abuse. So I told the story of my foster daughter, Morgan, and that they heard from me every single year, talk about her. And what nobody had ever asked me was why? Why did I become a foster parent? And it was really weighing on me because people just thought I was this awesome human that was doing all the right things and stepping up and those kinds of things. But they didn't really understand, because the reason that all that happened was because I had a very similar experience to my foster daughter, just from a different neighborhood and from a different background. And the difference was that I got to see her and hear her and believe her and do something about it, which unfortunately was not my case as a kid growing up. And so on stage, I told this story about how you'd always heard me talk about this experience, but never really heard me talk about why. And I shared a bit about growing up in fear and living a life of fear, and that I was finally going to be free of that. And by sharing this story with everyone, and with my father's passing, not having to be afraid and in living in fear anymore that he would hurt us. And it was one of these moments that in that very like moment where I was speaking it out loud, it was like, is this even happening? Am I saying this? Because I had been trained very well by my dad to not talk about anything like this, to keep it inside, to know that if I were to speak up about it, that there would be bad consequences and they would be my fault. So it was a very ingrained belief inside of me. And when he died, it was an experience of like feeling freedom for the first time. And then when I came on stage and said it out loud, spoke my truth out loud, it was a whole nother level of freedom that I had no idea that it was something that I really desperately needed, because I was living a very full life, but it was also a very inauthentic life, because I was hiding a huge part of what made me who I am and what drove me to the choices that I made and the beliefs and the values that are associated to all of those experiences. And so of the 400 folks, I can't tell you how many people came up to me who had known me maybe for 10 years and said things about how they never realized and now they understand me so much better. And then there's people who never even talked to me, but were just at that event and said, I don't know you, but I'd like to share my story with you because I have my own story that I feel like I can tell now. And so it was like a lightning bolt went through my body, and it said to me, you need to create spaces where voices are heard, stories are released, and purpose is ignited. And then I left and I started my own business. And that has always been at the core of everything that I do, is creating spaces where people feel safe to be vulnerable, to go deep within themselves, to understand why they are the way they are, why the things that matter to them matter, and then to help them understand how they can use those as strengths and tools in their life to create a day-to-day existence that's one of purpose and personal alignment.
I'm just sighing over here because there's so much to unpack from what you just shared. But first of all, I just want to say, I just want to witness you and honor you for having the courage to share your voice and to do the work that you do. I resonate deeply with what you shared, having experienced, abuse and other things myself as a child, but to resonate with how liberating and freeing it feels to finally get to the place where you have the courage to share your story. There is no other feeling like it.
Yeah, it's true. It really is. And more people, I think, are realizing that they can do it too, because you don't have to be a famous celebrity or somebody who's on a top 100 list for your story to matter. Everybody's story matters. And as soon as we start sharing them, we realize how powerful they are and how powerful we are as the keepers of those stories.
Exactly. I mean, the billions of us on the planet, not one of us is the same. We each have a unique story. And I feel like that's one of the beauties of being human.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're out in the world igniting purpose. It just lights me up inside.
I'm so glad to hear that. Well, I'm so glad you're in the world igniting purpose too.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we do similar work actually in a lot of ways. And one of the things that we also share in common and that we were talking about prior to our conversation here is conscious leadership. And this is something that I'm so very passionate about, because our world is experiencing this significant shift in consciousness, and the traditional patriarchal systems, institutions, and things, that have been in place for so long are no longer working. And it's exciting to see all of the awakening that is happening on the planet. And so anyways, the importance and, of human sustainability and the importance of putting people first. I know that this is something that you're also really passionate about. So I'd love to hear more about what conscious leadership means to you.
Yeah, well, conscious leadership is so deeply connected to mindful leadership. For me, they seem to be holding hands with each other. And I really see it as the name of this show, right? It's being awake and doing things on purpose because of that awareness of being awake, right? Being present, being able to understand what's going on inside of you so that you can translate it to what's going outside of you with an awareness instead of a reaction. Right? Being able to really be in tune with both your inner world and your outer world, and having the ability to decipher how you're showing up in those spaces. That's not defensive or trying to get things done a very specific way in a state of perfectionism, but being able to allow life to flow in front of you and to be present and make the most of those experiences as they show up in each moment.
Absolutely. And I feel like this is a great segue into another question. Something else I wanted to get your insight on is that, how significant do you believe that someone's clarity of purpose has in regard to embodying their highest self as a leader?
I think it has so much to, it's like, that's a softball right there, Jennifer. It's like, well, yeah, it's very important, right?
Well, it's amazing how many people don't, you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, I feel like it's intimately tied to what you talk about with values too.
Yes, it really is. And there's such a big conversation going on. I think Simon Sinek really kicked off a lot of this know your why, right? Start with why. And people have gotten really intense about understanding their why, aka their purpose. And I think it's actually sometimes very damaging for people because they think that there is one specific reason that each human being is put on this earth. And until you figure that out, you don't have purpose. And that's your one thing, right? That you always do for the rest of your life. And I have a very different belief system when it comes to that. I think that as human beings, we're complex and dynamic, and we change and we have experiences, and we can become something different on the other side of them. And so, speaking of values, the way that I think about purpose and how important it is for every individual, whether you consider yourself a leader or not, but every single human has the ability to live from a state of purpose by activating their values on a consistent basis. So essentially, if you know what your intrinsic motivators are, right? What are the things inside of you that make you light up, that give you energy, that make you feel the most alive? So for me, those are values are authenticity and inner harmony and unity with nature. And those are things that I know if I can activate them anytime during the day, I'm going to be living in my purpose. Because unity with nature, to me, for example, is gaining wisdom from nature. So being present with nature. So does that mean that my purpose every single day is to be one with nature and to advocate for nature and to go full board with nature? Maybe, maybe not. right? And so it doesn't have to be one specific thing. It can be a whole beautiful, dynamic, messy, complicated pattern of weaving of things. But as long as those things, quote unquote, reflect your values, you're going to feel a sense of alignment. You're going to feel a sense of internal drive, and you're going to wake up with enthusiasm for your life because you're activating your purpose through your values.
Yes, I wholeheartedly believe that as well, that our life is our message. You know, part of our purpose is to embody living, you know, each and every day. And also our souls crave expansion. We aren't meant to, as you said, like find the one thing and then do that thing. And we may start out doing one thing, start a business, have a job, have a hobby or a passion or whatever, but that can also change over time. And that's a great thing because we're meant to continually learn and expand. It's like our place here is like a school, kind of.
Yeah, really. One of my dear friends and somebody who sits on my advisory board, she said to me the other day, she's like, I feel like we could take your business and turn it into a flip book because it started as this one thing and it really gradually but intentionally has evolved. And I thought that was such a beautiful visual, you know, those books that you used to like take and turn the pages really fast and they would create a pattern, you know, a cartoon, moving cartoon type of thing. That's what she was describing. And I used to, when people would say things like that to me, I would internalize them and like, what's that about? And maybe even find a way to use it as a weapon against myself. Like, oh, why don't I just stick to the thing I'm good at? Like, why do I always have to be changing? And like, why can't I just be like so many other people and do the same thing and not make things so complicated? I'm so grateful to be in a stage of my evolution and journey to realize how beautiful that is and how powerful that is and what a gift it is to realize that every day is a new possibility to show up in deeper alignment with your truest self, which in my world, I talk about that as in the greatest alignment with my values. So if I can have it every single day, have some activation of my values and I show up in alignment with them, oh my gosh, that flip book's going to go on forever because it's constantly going to be evolving into the next version of who I am. What is the reflection of that version? And I just really want to encourage more people to recognize that I think we're trained societally of like, you figure out what you want to be, and then you go to school and you get a degree for that thing, and then you go into the workplace and you do that thing, and then you retire. And it's not really how that works. It does for some people, and good for them. This is not a knock on anybody who went that path and it worked out well for them. I think that's beautiful. But for most of us, we're numbing our way through life because we don't feel like evolving. We don't feel like trying something risky or doing something outside of our comfort zone or pushing ourselves beyond what we think is going to be acceptable to our peers and our parents and, you know, the people around us. And I think that the more you can be in tune with that sense, what is that sense of purpose within yourself? It becomes this natural compass and guide in what's my next step on the path, because all I have to do is follow that and it's going to open up and illuminate what comes next.
I feel like that feeling of wanting to change or just basically like questioning whether or not you can take a risk or change or expand comes from a belief. And I feel like it's also largely generational. For example, I would say millennials and younger, I see a lot more people that aren't staying in the same jobs or, you know, doing the same thing for as long. Whereas with Gen X, you know, and older, I feel like I see more often what you're referencing, that whole mentality around fear of change and having to stick with the same thing forever.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up, that point of how it's there's obviously differences and similarities across all the generations since we're all humans, but there is a different level of willingness to take risk, willingness to recognize that there isn't a perfect way to do this, and my imperfectly perfect way is best. And not necessarily just cowering at the face of fear, but saying, I need to step forward into the fear because there's so many more podcasts like this one and inspirational speakers and access to research and data and things that we didn't have in generations before, so that you have this incredible exposure to so many thought leaders in a way that's unprecedented today as it was in generations prior. And I think it's given more people the tools and ability to find the messages that they need to hear and to create, like, I feel like I'm being taught by so many global leaders all over the world because I listen to their interviews, I listen to their TED Talks, I take their online courses and those kinds of things. And it's such a gift to have an abundance of global community where you can find a message or many, many, many teachers and messengers that can help you in those beliefs, right? And one of my teachers says all the time, a belief only exists as long as you say yes to it. Once you say no, a new possibility opens.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought up that last point, because something that I've been thinking of in speaking with you and bringing up is that, you know, you hear a lot in the personal development world and online about fear isn't real and all of that kind of thing. But what a lot of people don't talk as much about, I mean, unless you delve deeper into a course or whatever, or a book, is that our mind is a faithful servant, okay? But our mind tells us to do things based upon past experiences and environmental conditioning, which form our beliefs. And so our souls crave expansion. And so whenever we're looking to do something new or to travel an unknown path, there has to be that willingness, right, to take risk. And a lot of people, their mind is in the driver's seat, where really the mind belongs in the passenger seat, and the intuitive knowing belongs in the driver's seat, because the intuitive knowing is what guides you to expansion.
Yeah. And I think for most people, it takes a lot of pain to get to that place, right? A lot of trying to do it all with the head, trying to figure it all out with your brain. And then eventually getting to a place where you're like, why isn't it working? None of the things from my brain are making me feel a sense of alignment and peace and power and purpose. And I got on my path to consciousness because I had a work addiction. I literally started to go to mindfulness-based psychodynamic therapy as a result of having a debilitating work addiction. And I didn't even know that that was a thing until I went to therapy and she diagnosed me. And the first thing that we did, it was an experience where I was essentially working like 12 to 14 hours a day and waking up in the middle of the night and working and then falling asleep on my couch with my laptop on my belly and then waking up and starting all over again. And so it wasn't because my company was telling me to do that. It was because my brain was telling me I had to do that in order to be successful. And it kept telling me over and over and over again that I wasn't good enough and I had to work harder and I had to prove myself and all these kinds of things. And it put me in a really bad spot in so many ways. And it was an experience. I'm so incredibly grateful that I got connected to an amazing therapist that was grounded in mindfulness practices, because she taught me how to slow the brain down. And I did not think it was possible. I thought numbing was the only thing that could help it, because that's the only thing I had ever done prior to that. And I think the more people that have get to a breaking point in their pain and they realize, I can't do this anymore, I have to go ask somebody who's an expert in this to help me because it's not working, it can get you from moving from your head to your heart, and your heart as an expression of your soul and intuition. And what a gift that is, because it releases so much pressure and pain in thinking you have to do it one specific way, having to get it done perfectly, having to follow the path that was already set out, that others have done, instead of just tuning into your heart, to your intuition, to your soul's guidance, and saying, what's right for me? What's right for where I am right now? What do you have to tell me? And going within to find those messages and answers.
Absolutely, being present. I find in many of the cases that you describe in terms of, that work addiction that you were diagnosed with, I find in many cases that addictions are the brain's way of, it's like a protection mechanism to mask the deeper things that are going on. Was that the case for you?
Totally.
Yeah.
My whole life. So I already mentioned, I had an abusive father, and he was very much a teacher of, you got to work all the time. You got to work really hard. Straight A's isn't good enough. You have to also do all the things and have a job and help out. And my dad, he had a construction company, but also worked outside of that. And so I was tarring a roof with him one day and then stripping paint off the shutters the next day, in between working 2 jobs and being in high school and being on sports teams. And so it was drilled very hard into my brain that I had to be really busy and get a lot accomplished off of a task list in order to get love.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing? I mean, just really just amazing, not necessarily the word crazy, that those experiences that we have, how they can stay with us and how they can manifest themselves in so many different ways as we move into and throughout our adulthood.
Oh my gosh. And the part that is the greatest opportunity is that most of us never take the time to pause, reflect, and connect, and recognize, oh, this is a pattern. This pattern stems from this experience, and now I can be more aware of when I'm triggered into that pattern so I can help myself out in the future when it happens. Because the majority of us are just being pulled and tossed and turned by the inner dialogue of not enoughness, being self-judgmental, being really cruel even at times to ourselves. And it's like you just think that's the only way, but you don't realize that the messages that you're telling yourself are almost always repeated messages that you heard somewhere else or that you interpreted about yourself when you were a young person.
Absolutely. MaryBeth, what advice would you have for other, conscious leaders, other people who are out there feeling that guidance to share their voice?
I would encourage them to spend some time in reflection. So that time to go within. So if this is a person who, this is a new thing, so sort of like the story I shared when we kicked things off, I'd never shared that kind of a vulnerable thing about myself before publicly. And then it was like, oh, it's out, now it's out. There's no putting it back. I would say that in a moment like that, where it's going to be a big share, like a big one, I'd really spend some time preparing yourself. So I was in therapy for several years at that point. I had a support system behind the scenes leading up to that moment and after that moment. So depending on the story you want to share, I would start by taking some time to pause and reflect and think about, what do you need to be well through this experience? So it's probably going to feel very vulnerable for many people. That is an overwhelming kind of feeling. So think about, like, what do you need to feel strong and taken care of before, during, and after that experience? When I used to talk about my dad in that story, I would have to like pause because I would be like holding back tears. And that's something to really be aware of within yourself, because we all respond differently to ourselves when we get emotional in public places. Or even if you're going to share something perhaps online where people can comment, to just recognize that you are the one who gets to control the narrative, no matter how anybody responds or doesn't respond to it. So that's that inner dialogue that we talked about. And the more that you can have, whether it's a therapist or a coach or a friend or yourself, maybe you have really good internal skills, being kind and gentle and loving and supportive in that opening up. And I'd also say that if you're somebody who's looking to share your story in a way that you really want to ignite inspiration and power and good feelings in other people, from the sense of like, oh, I hope that other people will be able to do this as a result, I would highly recommend getting familiar with the hero's journey framework. So that whole idea of, going through the world as a normal person, and then you're realizing, like, I can't go about doing these things the way that society is telling me to. And so you get called to go on this journey, and, there's obstacles and pitfalls, and you ultimately come out on top of the mountain. And the idea is that you get to go back into community and share with others how they too can climb the mountain. And so I think sometimes when people are sharing a vulnerable story, they don't always think about the way in which people are going to receive the message. So if it's very intentional, wanting to do this from a place of inspiration, spend some time and really think about your hero or heroine's journey and how you got to where you are, because it's not always the right time to share the story. If you're in the middle of it and you don't have tools to support yourself, it might not serve you to share the story, because you might be too raw. But if you are moving through it, and especially if you're on the other side of it, oh my goodness, there are so many lives that you are going to change as a result of sharing and speaking up. And that's not to say that you can't share your story when you're at the beginning of it or anything like that. I say this simply as a way for people to kind of reflect with themselves and think about, once I say this, what is my intention? What is it that I hope to get as a result? For me, it was freedom. That's what I wanted. I wanted to live fully as my authentic self. And I felt like I was lying to everybody all the time because I was hiding this huge part of who I was. But I was perfectly comfortable talking about what happened to my foster daughter. It just was so inauthentic to me, going back to that value of authenticity. And so it was like I needed to do this to feel a sense of alignment inside of myself, and to feel like I wasn't fooling people, which I wasn't, but that's how I internalized it. So really get clear on, like, why is it that you want to do this? Have a support system if you feel like that's something that would be needed. Professional, especially if it's a very deep and vulnerable share that you may need support to get through. But then also, continuing to recognize that every single time we share our story, whether it's polished in a perfect hero's journey or it's just a blurting out in a moment, more often than not, I would say 99% of the time, it's a really good idea. It's like such a beautiful thing, because as soon as we start sharing ourselves, as soon as we show others that we give ourselves permission to be human, it opens that possibility for everybody who's listening to give themselves that same permission.
That's great advice. MaryBeth, if someone's interested in connecting with you more deeply, where is the best place for them to reach out and find you?
Yeah, well, I'm really active on LinkedIn, so they can find me there. If they're interested in collaborating, they can absolutely go to my website and visit sparkvisionnow.com, and you can see what we have coming up as far as experiences and events. And I'm also a teacher on Insight Timer. So if you're familiar with Insight Timer, it's a free mindfulness and meditation app. And I have a combination of free guided practices and also a course, a 10-day course on how to know and live in alignment with your values. It's called Knowing and Living Your Values.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, MaryBeth, for taking the time to join me today. I just loved our conversation, and I know that so many people are going to be inspired by what we've shared here today.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. And thank you to your community for wanting to be a part of these conversations. And I'm just so honored that I got to be a part of your community today and beyond. So I appreciate it deeply. And I can't wait to continue the conversation beyond the podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Awaken on Purpose podcast. Please visit me and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or at awakenonpurpose.com so you never miss an episode. To learn more about how you can live your purpose and make an impact as a conscious leader, visit me at jenniferspoor.com, and while you're there, be sure to join my email list for exclusive offers and a weekly dose of inspiration.